Thanks for that introduction. Good morning to everyone who's here live in this part of the world. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you this morning. Sorry we can't meet in person, but nonetheless, it's great to have the opportunity to present digitally. I know this is a global audience, so good evening and good afternoon to those of you who are watching from further afield. So this morning, I'd like to talk about AI and predictive modeling in the food industry. As mentioned in the introduction there, Creme Global is a scientific modeling company. Our mission is to help companies and governments and research organizations to do better science, make better decisions using all of the available data that they have access to in their organization or company. So this will be a high-level overview of what's going on in the industry, some of the case studies that we've looked at. So I'm going to start with some key trends in the industry, which you'll be quite familiar with, but it's great to cover them. I'm going to talk about the journey to predictive analytics from data, what exactly we mean by machine learning or artificial intelligence. And we've done 3 quick case studies from industry where you can see how this is being used in practice. So some of the trends in the sector, in the food sector, and this is an interesting one, pre-pandemic especially, consumers were under pressure for time. They were cash rich, time poor. So they're looking for a convenience, foods that were ready to cook, ready to eat, ready to heat up. And they're looking for a clean label. They're understanding the need for lower salt, lower sugar. They want good shelf life so they can have convenience in their home, and also looking for meat alternatives for both health and environmental reasons. Now, this was a mega trend up to about a year ago, but I know, a lot of my friends and people I know have had a lot more time by having the commute cut out, and they're spending more time, cooking and making sourdough bread and pizza bases from scratch. But I think this trend will continue, and certainly the clean label and meat alternatives are mega trends that the industry is well aware of. Demographics are changing in the Western world, especially. There's an increasing older population. And for a food safety point of view, we have to be cognizant of the weaker immune systems. And we've become all too familiar with this, of course, over the last 12 months as well, where we know the more susceptible population can be older. And we need to be ultra safe. It was said recently that if it's not safe, it's not food, and we need to be, cognizant of that risk to those demographic groups, and those demographic groups are changing. At the same time, the food supply chain is complex, and this was spoken about yesterday at the plenary session as well. And we've seen many cases of this recently with, for example, the horse meat fraud issue in Europe, which was discovered by the Irish food safety authorities, but it took them weeks to figure out what was going on because they couldn't understand it, why they were seeing this horse meat in the beef burgers. But it turned out that there's a very complex supply chain, and the products was moving from different countries and different regions, and that's happening all of the time. The supply chain has become more global. We need to source raw materials from various regions, and there are different regulatory standards. So companies themselves are having to enforce their own regulatory standards upon suppliers. They have to risk assess their suppliers. They have to audit their suppliers. But that's complex. At the same time, of course, we're well aware of the global megatrend of climate change. And this has interesting risks. This introduced new risks to the food supply chain, from changing weather patterns, changing climate, flooding events that can cause, contaminations of the water supply and can cause raw ingredient issues. At the same time, consumers want to minimize their carbon footprint, and companies have to respond to that. And that has a cost and complexity, associated with it. Also, we're introducing new circular economies. We're reusing packaging, or reusing materials, and again, that can introduce risks to the supply chain. At the same time, though, technology has evolved rapidly over the last decade or so. Data capture, which was a thing that was clunky in the past, has now come into its own. Companies are at different levels of their maturity in terms of the ability to capture data, but there's cheap IoT devices available now that can capture live real-time data. There's cloud-based systems, which I'll go into. There, sensors are becoming more widespread, and we can bring all this data together. And of course, what the topic of this talk, ML and AI, machine learning and artificial intelligence, have become more pervasive, more productive in industry and available to all. Science is always evolving. The ability to detect smaller and smaller things on a chemical and microbiological level is always accelerating, and we're learning more and more about new risks and hazards. For example, Listeria mono was not considered a hazard 40 years ago, but we know a lot more about it now. We're learning about antimicrobial resistance. Regulators are using, leading next generation sequencing technologies to really look at being able to look at exact strains and details of contaminants and products. So, this is a challenge for industry. The science marches on, and they need to understand, industry needs to understand this, regulators need to understand all of this. And to me, it all comes back to data. And I know the IAFP audience is very data literate, a lot of mathematical modeling going on. But I want to talk about, the journey from the mathematical models that we're all familiar with into predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. So for us as a company, Crem Global, we've been around about 16 years, and I know many of you might have come across us over the years. And, we like to focus on predictive analytics and machine learning. And if you consider the use of data, at the top of the pyramid here, is the exciting stuff where you get into predictive analytics and machine learning and ability to really use data to have fancy predictions and dashboards and models. But of course, for industry, there's a number of steps and work that has to be done. So we like to represent this as a kind of a fundamental pyramid or hierarchy of needs in predictive analytics, right from gathering data. How do we collect the data? How do we structure it, validate it, make sure it's cleaned? How do we share it with the appropriate people? Once you've done that, you can move up to insight. You can do visual analytics, basic statistics, graphs, visual dashboards that you can drill down into. And of course, you can move on to predictive analytics using mathematical models and machine learning. So let me talk a little bit about that. So for example, in the food industry, we're seeing a lot of companies now use their quality assurance data. They're tapping into their factory systems to get the data out of that. They have information on the ingredients, the specifications, their suppliers that they're required to deliver. They're auditing their suppliers. They're getting that data into the system. They have shelf life studies. They have processing data. So the types of technologies we use then to get from there to the next step would be things like data lakes. So data lake is a concept where you can just throw all of your data into a shared system, both structured and unstructured. And once you do that, you can start to then translate that data into more structured data, like tabular data that we're more used to seeing in things like databases and Excel. So cloud systems, and make that accessible to the right people for visualization and modeling. As we move up that chain, we have visual dashboards. Visual dashboards. This is in my way. I'm not sure if you can see that. Product and factory information. So what we're doing here in the insight stage, we're getting that data into visual analytics. So people can see the data, they can understand it, drill down into it, and things like, insights into your factory, into your product safety, your food safety are possible now. Finally, the holy grail, I guess, of all of this is to get into optimization to make your factory more efficient, higher quality, better products, more safe. Predict food safety incidents in advance, and implement new, more advanced new product development cycles. And I want to talk a bit about that. So when I talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, what do I mean? I'm going to briefly touch on this. So the whole field of data science will be very familiar to many of you. You know, in college, we did things like statistics, we did graphing and visual analytics. Linear regression is a very useful statistical tool. And many of you will have done modeling and simulation. And these are all very fundamental parts of data science, of course. The emerging technologies now in machine learning are things like neural networks. And the way I like to think of these are, in the data science world over here, the analyst or the scientist has to think and make decisions, write the models, and think about the analytics they're going to do, run those analytics, inspect them, and maybe iterate on that process manually. In machine learning, what we do is we structure all the data and we create a training set. And the machine starts to iterate rapidly over that data, doing statistics on a massive scale, randomly changing parameters until the data starts to fit into the model. So the machine is creating the model instead of the scientist. So those models are then tested on a data set that wasn't used to train the model. And so there's a kind of an art to machine learning as well as a science, where the scientist or the data scientist running the machine or building the machine learning models has to be able to understand the balance between training and testing, the right algorithms to use. And there's many different machine learning algorithms that are available to use, many different libraries as well that can be pulled off the shelf in Python and other technical packages like that to run your machine learning algorithms. And of course, machine learning is part of a bigger field called artificial intelligence, which goes into far more areas of interest, like knowledge modeling, symbolic reasoning, and other kind of simulations of intelligence using artificial intelligence. We'll focus a lot on machine learning in this talk. And what I like to think there is, like, you're using data, quantitative data, you're training a model and you're testing the model. And once you've done that enough, the model is ready for production. And you can use that model to make predictions and to optimize your systems. So that's a brief introduction into what I mean by AI machine learning. So finally, I would like to just go through 3 case studies from food industry that we've been involved in. And these are AI for preventative food safety, AI or machine learning. I'm going to use the term slightly interchangeably from now on. AI or machine learning in supply chain risk management. So trying to figure out the risks in your supply chain and manage those risks. And then finally, a very exciting new area of accelerating new product development using data and AI. So onwards with case study number 1. So when we think about food safety, and this is what IAFP thinks about all the time, let's take it down to the very practical, factory level things we can think about in a factory. We have microbial concerns, we have raw product input, we have people coming and going, so we have hygienic design validation, we have the weather, we have the climate, we have condensation arising in cold and hot areas of the factory depending on airflow, and we know about predictive microbiology and how things can grow in any environment. And companies are starting to think about a lot more of these things. These things can be measured. We know the schedules, we know the cleaning schedules, we know we can put IoT devices in to look at some of these inputs. And the companies are starting to see, they're testing a lot of their product in order to maintain quality assurance. So they're collecting samples, they're testing the raw materials, testing the finished products, and then if everything looks good, they ship the product. Okay, so then we're realizing, like, well, what about this valuable data resource that we're building up over time? Why should we just test and ship and just kind of leave that data on the shelf? That data is very valuable, of course, when we start to combine it with alternative data sets and start to make it structured and get a history that we can link to key information that we want to know about, like quality and safety. So why stop here? Let's move on to the insight side of things. We can simply structure and analyze that data, visualize it, perhaps put predictive models linking to that data, and then take action on it. So you can see simple things like seeing trends over time, winter, summer, seasons, looking at the maybe comparing your factory to the other dozen or so factories in your company. How do you compare quality wise? Are you seeing more or less incidents? Are you seeing better quality? And a lot of companies now have got together to aggregate data. And we've worked on a number of projects recently where we can aggregate, anonymize, and make secure that data and create dashboards that all companies can tap into so they can benchmark their capabilities and progress against the best practice of other companies. They can share anonymized data with regulators in a secure way where there's even kind of third-party data security structures in place so the data is protected. So we can build out then dashboards for our factory. So this is one really great outcome where every day the factory managers can see dashboards of what's going on. They understand the factory layout. They're inputting information on temperature, humidity. Their standard microbial culturing data can go in. And these are the data sources from these. We're talking about IoT, Internet of Things devices, feeding in some of this data automatically. The Laboratory Information Management System, or LIMS, can store other data. And that data goes into a tabular form. Looks a bit like Excel, but what we use is a cloud-based system where all of this data is on the cloud, so it can be easily collaborated amongst scientists and regulatory affairs and safety professionals. We put in all of the information that we can get our hands on, and that can be factory dependent. We can put in some of those IoT devices if required to get the information. So it could be things like humidity, air temperature, airflow, surface temperatures can be important, and condensation, of course, pressure. And all of those things can be captured. And once you put those data capture technologies in place, the data starts to become structured. So we can now analyze that data. If we think about microbiology and the traditional methods of culturing samples in a factory plant, only a certain percentage, around 10% of bacteria, are actually culturable, but there's a whole iceberg under the water that can't be seen of potential other bacteria. And what we've seen arise recently, and we've started to use it in a number of projects, is next generation sequencing for looking at swabbing and quantifying the whole microbiome of a factory environment at the genus level. So we're looking to look at the relative abundance and cluster and trends and patterns in the genus level of the microbiome, because this can be very informative of a factory environment changes happening and risks may be potentially occurring. So what we've done here is we swabbed, we worked with a number of food producers, swabbing the manufacturing environment on a regular basis, sent those swabs off for sequencing, comes back with a relative abundance, as we kind of see represented here. We can then use PCA type techniques to cluster those samples. And here we see, for example, if we cluster by date, we see a little microbiome that's certainly deviated from the normal, if you want to think about it like that, based on this visualization technology. It's potential anomaly. So based on date, we see the potential anomaly on the October 17th here, where this cluster of results has clustered together. Now, what you can do with that then is also link that to your traditional testing of food safety or quality, and over time you can start to see if these deviations actually result in a food safety or quality issue. And the machine learning algorithms can learn make those links between this data and the data you're interested in. This one here is just the sample. The cluster is based on the type of sample. For now, you can see the different colors here are based on the type of sample, raw ingredient, finished product, etc. And this is the raw section of the factory, and we're seeing another slight deviation, I suppose, from the core or the standard results, and in a slight anomaly. So how this works is in the real world is we set up a plan, we swab on many locations in the factory. We choose the key locations of interest in the factory and swab those on a regular basis to build up data over time, maybe swabbing a number of times a week in about a dozen locations. And we can track those locations then on a dashboard, and we can see the results of those swabs, and we can trend that over time. And you can see here the relative abundance. So this is a schematic looking at various locations on a processing line. We can see the relative abundance of bacteria over time. The machine learning can then kick in and start to predict whether a microbiome is getting close to a microbiome that may support a pathogen of interest or a bacteria of interest. So we can actually predict that occurrence, and we can recommend interventions to prevent any food safety incidents based on the predictive microbiology of the microbiome. So what we've done here is we've looked at all of the data instead of just the standard culturing technology of predictive microbiology. We've looked at the whole next generation sequencing data. We've sampled it. We've created a historical data set. We've trained that data set against food safety and food quality metrics from the factory. And then over time, the machine learning learns when a microbiome or relative abundance of bacteria within the certain locations in the factory can potentially result in a risk. Just to finish up, two more quick examples and then I'll wrap up. So food supply chain is complex, as we all know. We spoke about this yesterday, and over the years we've realized this. So food companies are sourcing ingredients for many third parties, different countries, different regions, different suppliers, and there's risks that could be static based on the country of origin, based on the availability of substitutes, the type of product that they're supplying. There's also dynamic risks, and these could be articulated in the price of the commodity. So if the price goes up, there could be risk of fraud in your supply chain. Scarcity, trade volumes, climate, flooding, all of these things, yields can have dynamic risks on your food supply. So what we've done here is we've mapped the risk in the supply chain for various companies, food producers. And the key thing here is to be able to then target the producers and the suppliers with more interventions and audits, the ones that you might want to raise or you understand are higher up in your risk ratio than others. So you can actually be more efficient and smarter with your auditing. You can leave those suppliers alone who are high quality and highly reliable. And I'm getting a flashing screen here, so I'm going to finish up. And the final example then. Okay, some questions coming through. So yeah, we will catch up with those in a moment. So finally, this is a really interesting one. New product development is a very time-consuming kind of process where you need to understand the key ingredients, the marketplace, the shelf life, the quality, the sensory parameters of a product. And this traditionally takes a long time and for a new product to be developed and brought to market. But in recent years, companies are starting to use all of the data that they generated over long periods of time to accelerate the new product development process. So for example, in Food Navigator recently, we've seen that Givaudan, a company we've worked with in a number of projects in various areas over the years, has developed their own state-of-the-art machine learning AI tool called Atom. And I'll talk a little bit about the process, and it uses AI and data science techniques to minimize trial and error in the iteration process of food new product development. So think about, developing new products this in the traditional way. We put together recipes and prototype those products. We test them with consumers, and we test things like aroma, saltiness, color, acceptability, bitter taste, and we have an acceptability range on those metrics and a desired outcome for those. But what if we have done this for many years and we really understand our food product development process? We have lots of recipes, we've lots of sensory panels where we've measured things. We have shelf life studies on stable combinations of ingredients. So we know we can model all of this, bring the data together and look at, our potential new formulations. We can run these shelf life models and we can figure out which ones are likely to be acceptable to consumers, not just on the data produced, but over a period of shelf life time. And then we can optimize things for shelf life, the best shelf life, the lowest cost of ingredients, for example, the best nutritional content, lowest sugar, lowest salt, while still iterating over all these potential formulations and making sure that they're potentially acceptable to consumers, using a model that can link all of these things together. So the key thing here is the model has been trained to link the ingredients and kind of relative formulations to sensory data, along with processing and allowing us to optimize things to bring products to market, or only bring products to final testing which have that potential to be successful in the market. So it leads to faster new product development, faster throughput, and all of that very positive things in this fast changing world. So we saw how complex the consumer demand is in the world today. We saw the complexity of supply chains. We saw the pressure on companies from climate change and even regulatory and different regulatory standards around the world. And in my view, the answer to all of this complexity is data and modeling, and bringing all that data together in a structured way in order to visualize it and produce predictive models that can help companies to make better decisions around their new product development for food safety, quality, and consumer acceptance. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions. I know that was a high-level view, but I'm happy to take more technical questions. I know there's a fairly technical audience here, so thanks very much.